The AFL have finally closed out investigations into racism at the Hawthorn Football Club. With so many people in the media criticising the way that the Hawthorn Football Club and the AFL have gone about it, it begs a question. How should it have been done? Just lead. In April of 2022, the Hawthorn Football Club opened an investigation into the treatment of their First Nations players after one of their superstars of the game, Cyril Rioli, brought to light allegations of racism and poor treatment during his time at the club. The investigation, led by the Hawthorn Football Club, without any real involvement from the AFL, uncovered a series of allegations of racism throughout the period from 2010 to 2016. An era of mighty success for the Hawthorn Football Club on the field. Among these allegations is that members of the Hawthorn Football Club encouraged a player and his partner to have an abortion during this time. In September of 22, the story leaked, and the members of the media and the public who have read the story immediately formed opinions on whether the parties were guilty or not guilty. It's at this point that the AFL stepped in and they dedicated themselves to delivering an outcome by Christmas of 2022. We are now at the start of June 2023, and we've only just heard from Gil McLaughlin, the AFL CEO, in which all the accused parties have been exonerated from any wrongdoing. Nearly 9 months after the story was leaked, we've come to this conclusion, and it's a conclusion that certainly doesn't feel final. What can we learn from the way this has played out on the public stage? And what lessons can we take back to our work and use for ourselves? When you're in a leadership position, it is inevitable that you're going to get personnel issues come across your desk from time to time. Issues that are going to consume your entire focus, dragging you away from your day-to-day operations. What do you do when something like this happens in your team? Well, I'm going to take you through everything you should be doing, and we'll compare it to Hawthorn and the AFL and see what they should have done differently. There are 6 steps that you should always follow. When someone comes to you with a complaint, your first and primary role as their leader is to listen. You need to expel any bias that you might have and listen to their truth. Their perspective is their truth, it's their reality, and you need to give it the due respect it deserves at this early stage of the process. Document everything that they tell you. Ask further questions so that you can understand the situation a little bit better. What is the demeanour of your employee like when they come to talk to you? And make sure you're taking into account their mental health as you're having the conversation and looking out for those cues. Hawthorn did this well in the beginning. They sat down with Cyril and listened to his story and his truth. Off the back of what Cyril told them, they started the investigation in order to learn more about what was going on at their football club. The trouble being, the immediate public stance that this investigation took didn't really take into account the mental health of the people involved in the investigation. Everyone has an opinion. They'll form it instantly when they get patchy information about something that's happened. It's just basic human nature. When you keep your conversations and your investigations confidential, it will allow you to make decisions and opinions based on the facts that you've been given and completely eliminate the bias that your team might provide you when they find something out. Hawthorn could not have handled this situation any worse. When they uncovered an abundance of stories of racism within the club, the stories got leaked. Thankfully, as far as I know, the people that were telling their stories didn't actually have their identities revealed to this day, which is great news. Unfortunately, the family and the friends of these people are going to know exactly who they are. So they're left dealt with the burden of having their stories out there and people looking at them differently because of the stories that they've told. When the story leaked, Hawthorn eroded any trust that they might have had between themselves and the complainants. Because of this, coming to a resolution was always going to be very difficult. When you've got the information at hand from the employee who made the complaint, you need to make a call on who should be doing the investigation. More often than not, you're the appropriate person to do the investigation as the leader of the team. However, you might be implicated in the complaint or you might be too close to the things that are happening, which means you need to roll that up to someone higher in the business for them to run the investigation. If it is a bigger issue altogether, you might need to bring in independent investigators. Think about a fatality on a mine site. Everyone is too close emotionally and physically involved with that fatality. So every time that happens, independent investigators are brought in to investigate what actually happened. Hawthorn were implicated in Cyril's comments. Not broadly or vaguely, they were directly implicated in the leadership of the club. As soon as this happened, they should have been taking Cyril's comments and rolling them up to the AFL. But what actually happened was Hawthorn decided to go off their own back and do an investigation that they were ill-equipped for and far too close to the subject matter. Eventually, when things started to pile up with Hawthorn's investigation, they realised that they were ill-equipped to deal with what was going on. So they've swiftly handballed it to the AFL. Now, the AFL immediately brought in an independent panel to do the investigation. They did this to ensure that there wasn't going to be any institutional bias in the findings made by the panel. I'm going to take a minute right here in the middle of this video just to let you know that I am a young and growing channel, which means subscriptions are incredibly important to me. To help grow this channel and help me get my voice out there to more people, please hit that subscribe button if you've been enjoying what's going on right here. Enough of that, let's get back to the video. To properly understand the complaint, you need to gather as much information and perspective as you possibly can. When I've done this in the past, I've interviewed entire crews. I've interviewed people that might have just been in the vicinity at the time of the complaint. You'll often get nothing out of these interviews, but when you do, it helps you round out your perspective. And when you gather everybody's perspective and all the information you possibly can, it's going to help you make the right judgment in the end. Ongoing media on the Hawthorn racism saga has made it clear that the defendants were never actually interviewed. Alistair Clarkson, Chris Fagan and Jason Burt never actually brought in for an interview. And while your sympathies should lie with the complainants, you can't help but feel that they can't have possibly got the full picture if they haven't interviewed these three. And how could you possibly come to any sort of resolution if you haven't heard the story of these three individuals? When you're investigating a complaint as a leader, you must ensure that the burden isn't left entirely on your shoulders. Getting independent people to look at the data and the facts and to talk to you will help you make a course forward. And when you have independent people involved in the decision making and where you're going to go, it'll help ensure that any individual bias that you might have in the investigation is mitigated by these conversations. When the independent panel was formed by the AFL, they had independence, competence and balance in mind. They ensured that they had a King's Counsel on the panel, they had two barristers that were of First Nations heritage, and they had a human rights lawyer involved in the panel as well. When you get all the information and you have all the perspectives, it's time to make a decision. There comes a time in any investigation where the well of information just dries up. You need to park your individual feelings about the people involved and you need to make a decision based on the facts that you have at your hand. Sometimes irrefutable evidence isn't actually part of the investigation, but you still need to make a decision anyway. An important thing to remember is that employment court isn't criminal court, so you don't need to have irrefutable evidence at hand. It's the weight of probability that comes into account. If everyone says that individual A is a racist person and has been saying racist things without any irrefutable evidence, and person A is saying that, hang on, no, I'm not a racist person, the weight of probability suggests that they probably are racist, and that's enough information for you to make a call on where you need to go moving forward. And when making a decision, making it swiftly is incredibly important. Both the complainants and the defendants want an outcome, regardless of if it's what they expect or not. Closure is important. As I wrote the script for this, I've just finished listening to Gil's comments on the closure of this investigation by the AFL, and two things have really stood out to me. The first being, exonerating the people involved, like it feels like a soft decision. It feels very close to no decision being made, and it kind of feels like more questions are being raised than questions are being answered. And the other thing is that the outcome's taken 9 months. Like, most of us that follow AFL know that Alistair Clarkson has stepped away from football for an indefinite period of time because of the undue stress involved in these proceedings. And he was a defendant. I can only imagine what the complainants are going through at this time. There is only one certainty out of the Hawthorn racism saga, and that it's not over yet. They've raised more questions that have been answered and left stones unturned in this investigation. So we'll definitely expect to hear more about it. Making loose and vague decisions is not going to help out anyone, and it's going to reflect poorly on you as a leader. You're going to lose the respect of your team. If you want to understand more about how to make decisions and the decision-making process, well, then you should click on this link right here.